I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we were doing all right. As the NBA playoffs continue, our Thursday pod, we went 3-2 against the spread. We're still at 25-17 against the spread in the NBA playoffs / play-in, and we're rolling with 37 wins, 21 losses, and a push against the spread since we've been doing NBA picks on this pod. Let's head to the East as the Raptors are done. They lose big. A game that was a 1-point game at the half, followed up by a 17-0 run on the other side, and it was jammed done against the Sixers, and James Harden actually showed up, which, hey, very strange scenario going on there. Very strange scenario going on with Joel Embiid's face as the Sixers move on to face the Heat. We know that Kyle Lowry is out for game one. Jimmy Butler is listed as questionable, so a lot of injuries at the forefront of this series for sure. The other thing is game one, Monday night, Heat favored by 7.5. I think the Sixers, to me, like already I was going to think this matchup was going to be shaky for the Sixers with a healthy Joel Embiid. Now add in the fact that, you know, we're talking torn ligaments in his hand. Now he's a broken face. He's not even traveling for game one.
Yeah. Which
is a really, really crazy thing too. He is out. He's not even traveling to Miami for games 1 and 2, which to me, I mean, this is just not looking good. Give me the Heat minus 7.5 in game one and Heat in 5 in this series, because Joel Embiid coming back to play games 3 and 4, maybe with a mask and a sore thumb. Like, I feel like he's coming out to get the Philly crowd fired up in his like Willis Reed moment, more so than actually like bringing some production to this game. And the Miami Heat are just sitting there ready for James Harden, like PJ Tucker, Bam, like whatever Morris twin it is, it's on their team. Like they got dudes that are just sitting there waiting for James Harden. And plus, we're talking James Harden in Miami.
Right.
You know how that goes. Yeah. Give me Heat in game 1, Heat in game 5, Heat in 5.
Yeah. So first and foremost, we got to pour one out for the Raptors, right? We had that nice little, I wish we could jump in the time machine to a time when it was tied at halftime, or there was a 1-point game at halftime. Unfortunately, the Raptors went and ruined NFL draft night with that third quarter. Who knew, right? Doc goes to his zone, making adjustments. He traps Pascal Siakam, right? The guy who's handling the ball at the top that we talked about, right? Like, okay, he's not that great of a ball handler. He's just good enough when one guy's on him, but trapping him, problematic, right? And one bad quarter and it all goes to hell in a handbasket. And so, you know, maybe the big adjustment for the Sixers was they made shots in the first half, right? They scored 62 points in the first half. That might have been the only difference, really, when it comes down to the small sample size for all of that. So speaking of small sample size, right, Embiid breaks his face, but a couple of things. One, the market obviously adjusts for Embiid not being in the lineup, right? But we have to, unfortunately, this series is kind of ruined by all the uncertainty when it comes to injuries and that sort of thing. But at the same time, maybe it's not. Maybe there's some sort of value that we can glean from all of this. And so I look at this and I go, okay, 7.5, Miami minus 7.5. Where have I seen this before? And the answer is last week against the Atlanta Hawks. And so without Embiid, are the Embiidless Sixers worse than the Hawks? Because once Kyle Lowry was out for that game, and again, I'm going to say that, you know, Jimmy Butler is out for this game, even though we don't know. Is that where we're at with the Sixers team that like still has, you know, it's funny, like we slag on James Harden, but I kind of like James Harden in an early early part of a series. And I kind of like him when he's the only guy who can beat you and plays that distributor role, right? And so the difference between James Harden now and James Harden before, it can't just be like, oh, he's washed up. Right. It's a lot of it is role related. And so when you have to just give the ball to Joel Embiid or run plays for Joel Embiid, you know, get him the ball basically every time that he's on the court. That's not really what James Harden does. James Harden he makes the best pass available, right? He spreads the ball out to the 3 or 4 guys. That's what we saw in Houston all those years, essentially. Right. And so without the focus on Embiid, I actually think James Harden's production is going to be pretty good. And especially if like Jimmy Butler's out, and obviously Kyle Lowry would be a headache for James Harden potentially as well. You go, okay, well, who are the Heat going to switch or who are the Sixers going to switch Harden into, right? Like, how are they going to run that? And the answer is like, I don't think it matters, because this isn't Trae Young in his third year trying to get like big time shots off. This is James Harden. This is a better version right now. It's from a distribution. Wow. This is a better version right now from a distribution standpoint. And so I actually think James Harden's going to have a relatively decent series when Joel Embiid's out. Not to say that the Sixers are going to win the game, right? But that's not the requirement. The requirement is that this game specifically is close. Mm-hmm. And not even really all that close, 7.5, right? We saw the Hawks, whether they covered those, first two games, I believe in Miami or not, those games are like 4 or 5 point games coming down the stretch. This isn't a Heat team that was pulling away from the Hawks, even when they were shutting down, by and large, Trae Young. Mm-hmm. And so I just look at it and I go like, yeah, the price is already built into Joel Embiid not being there. Is the price built into Jimmy Butler not being there? At 7.5, it certainly seems like it's priced into him playing. So right now, if you bet it right this second without knowing that Butler was going to play, I think you're getting some good value if he does play, because I don't think the line's going to go up much higher. And if he doesn't, I think it's got to drop down, because you'll recall that number was 4.5 in that closing game when Butler and Lowry were out. And so if you're going to tell me that the Sixers without Joel Embiid are just worse than the Atlanta Hawks, I'm just having a hard time believing that, right? And so I'm going to compare and contrast those two teams right now. And right now, 7.5 is basically as high as it ever got in that Hawks series. So I actually like the points here with the Heat, though I would never touch them with the Sixers, though I would never touch them to win the game outright or win the series. Mm-hmm. But honestly, if Jimmy Butler didn't play, would not shock me if they just got hot from outside. Harden was doing the Harden thing. And sometimes it takes a couple of games to get used to guarding James Harden, right? You almost need to experience how often that guy gets to the free throw line to sort of realize, man, we got to tie our hands behind our backs the way that the Raptors sort of figured out later on in the series. Now, I know the Heat are well coached, but you know what? So are the Raptors, and they still fouled a ton in those first couple of games. So yeah, I think this is going to turn out to be a little bit more of an over adjustment here with Miami minus 7.5. So I'll take the Sixers plus the points in game one.
Yeah, it does suck really with all the injuries, because with the healthy team, if healthy both teams, like this would actually be a way more fun series to root against the Sixers in, and that they would get blown out in this series against a healthy Miami Heat team. But yeah, I mean, everything comes down to James Harden right now, right? Like there's no excuses at all for him. And it's just, can you keep them in it? And the expectation should be for everyone involved that they shouldn't get blown out in these two games for sure. So I totally see where you're coming from in this series. Who knows if you end up seeing Joel Embiid, who knows if you end up seeing Kyle Lowry in this series, and Jimmy Butler. Yeah, I don't know. He's making memes on the sidelines. So we'll see how that goes for sure.
And Embiid can slap on a mask at some point, right? Like a lot of that is we see guys play with that.
That's what it is, right? Like
exactly. And to me, that's actually a safer sort of bet, so to speak, that he returns versus somebody with like a soft tissue injury, like Kyle Lowry with a hamstring or whatever, right? It's like, even Devin Booker, right? We talked about him, like, okay, that could go again at any given time. Embiid's not going to re-break his face, right? He's going to put the mask on, and if he's cleared to play, he's going to be good to go. But you're right. Yeah, the concussion protocol is the big issue there. And yeah, I mean, maybe if you're looking to bet this series, maybe you wait to see Miami win this game tonight, and then it tightens back this idea that, okay, by the way, Joel Embiid can fly down at any point to Miami to play for game two, right? Just because he didn't travel yet doesn't mean that he won't travel down there for game two. And then the other element is, like, obviously home court means a lot in the NBA, right? And losing 2 games in Miami isn't exactly a death knell either. Mm-hmm. And so as much as we sort of think, Philadelphia, the Sixers and Joel Embiid are sort of a loser type, built team here with Glenn Rivers PhD, if we get to a point here with Miami winning this first game and we start talking ourselves, a plus 400, something along those lines for the Sixers on the series price, that's going to be pretty interesting. I don't know if we're going to talk, between now and game 2 necessarily. So just sort of keep your head up and keep your eyes open for that, because I think after game one, the Sixers series line might be an interesting play because this thing could end up being a longer series, especially if Embiid comes back.
Totally agree. Totally hear what you're saying there.